Thanks everyone for joining us today. My name is Katie C. I am the tab lead here. I'm actually located at West Virginia University, but tab is the technical assistance to brownfields provider for EPA Region 3. Next slide, please. So Mid-Atlantic TAB consists of 4 partners. We here at West Virginia University are the lead, and we are assisted by our partners at Marshall University, the University of Delaware School of Public Policy and Administration, as well as the Virginia Tech Community Design and Assistance Center. And so again, we provide assistance that is all free for EPA Region 3, and that consists of Delaware, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, West Virginia, and DC. Next slide, please. So just a bit of an overview. There are a variety of ways that we can provide assistance when it comes to brownfields. Again, all of the assistance that we provide is free. That includes helping communities and folks understand what a brownfield is. That includes identification of them, whether that's one in your community or more than one, and starting to understand what needs to be done to assess them, understanding what the potential contaminants may be, and then once you have a sense of that, ultimately cleaning up the properties and redeveloping those sites to make them active in the community again. We can help you understand the health impacts of brownfield sites, why it's important to clean them up so that they are not a threat to the community. We can help you understand how science and technology is used for this assessment, remediation, redevelopment, and reuse. And we can also help you comply with voluntary cleanup requirements. And sometimes that's not necessarily us providing that information, but we have a lot of folks in our network and on our team who can provide explanation and detail, and provide a good overview so that you have a solid understanding of the process, because it is a long process, but again, we are here to help throughout the whole duration. Next slide, please. So again, touching on some of the services we provide, that includes education and outreach, like today's webinar. When it comes to redeveloping, well, ultimately assessing, cleaning up, and redeveloping a brownfield site, it does not all happen with EPA funding. You do have to have a capital stack. You have to have more than one source of funding and assistance, and that's why we found it really important to host today's webinar talking about historic preservation resources. It's very common for brownfield sites to also be located either within a historic district or be a contributing structure within a district, or just be a historic building all on its own. So again, we are really excited for today's presenters, because again, this is just one piece that you can add on to the ultimate cleanup and redevelopment of brownfield sites. We also are here to provide support to those who have successfully obtained an EPA grant. We are available to help those who are looking to apply for a grant, and the assistance we can provide can be specific to one site or area-wide. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to, I think, Courtney, right?
I think Cody.
Cody, excellent. All right, Cody, take it away.
All right, good morning. I'm very happy to be here with you all today. I'm just going to go over very briefly the National Register program for people who might not be as familiar with it. The National Register of Historic Places is a federal list of properties around the United States that have been deemed worthy of preservation. And the program dates back to the 1966 National Historic Preservation Act, which is the foundation for most historic preservation programs today. It's administered by the National Park Service on the federal level, and then each state processes nominations through what we call a State Historic Preservation Office, or a SHPO for short. Anytime you want to nominate a property to the National Register, you go through your state SHPO to help get that nomination through. Today, after nearly 60 years, there's about 100,000 nominations across the United States, encompassing about 2 million individual resources. And a resource can be any building, street, landscape, structure, things of that nature. In West Virginia, we have about 1,100 sites on the register today. So, Next slide, please. All right, so there are some misconceptions about what National Register listing does and doesn't mean for one's property. And here are a few things that listing does mean. Putting a property on the National Register can provide some like prestige and recognition for a property. It's kind of an honorary designation. It offers limited protection from projects that are funded by the government, like road construction, bridge replacements, coal mining permits. And then properties can be eligible to apply for grants, both through a SHPO or through various nonprofit organizations. And properties are eligible to apply for historic rehabilitation tax credits. So if you want to do work on your property, you can get a pretty good tax credit, about 25% commercial for our state, and the level can vary by state. But it's a good way of financing renovation work on a property to help make it productive and useful for a community again. Next slide. What listing does not do. Contrary to popular belief, there aren't any state or federal restrictions on what one can and can't do with a property once it's on the National Register. It doesn't restrict a person's use or sale of the property. It doesn't require that you have to maintain the property in a certain way. It doesn't require you to have it open to the public for viewing or tours. While you do have the opportunity to apply for funding, it doesn't guarantee funding for projects or perpetual maintenance. It doesn't protect a property from demolition. People can still demolish historic properties, though we prefer you don't, of course. It doesn't provide any free historical marker to display on the property. And while these restrictions don't exist on a state or federal level, communities at the lower level, like towns and counties, can create their own restrictions on property use, design review, and things like that. So if you do own historic property, you should be sure to look at your local ordinances to see whether or not there are any guidelines or requirements for what you can do with your property. Next slide. So what are some of the qualifications for listing? And there are a few that are established by the National Park Service. In most cases, a property should be at least 50 years old, old enough to actually have attained some historic value. It must retain historic integrity. We define integrity as the ability of a property to convey its historic significance. In other words, does the building still look historic? Has it been altered very much? And what level of integrity a property needs to retain can vary by situation. But doing things like replacing the siding with a different material, changing the shape of the roof, replacing the windows, adding an addition to your building, enclosing a front porch, different actions like that can diminish a property's integrity. And then you do need property owner consent, of course. In cases where you have a historic district, you need the consent of at least half or more of all the property owners in the area. If more than half of the owners object to a nomination, then the project cannot move forward and the district doesn't become a district. And then lastly, the property has to meet at least one of 4 different criteria established by the Park Service. Typically, one of these 4, it can be connected to a historical event, a historically important person, historic design characteristic, or have historic archaeological potential. And we'll get more into that later, but it's not just enough for a property to be old. It has to have some kind of historic theme, historic thing connected to it, beyond just being more than 50 years old. Next slide, please. And specifically, what is a historic district? The National Park Service defines a district as something that has a significant concentration, linkage, or continuity of sites, buildings, structures, or objects connected historically or aesthetically by plan or physical development. What does that mean? So basically, if you have a group of buildings or other resources in a area together that are all historically important and have a single historical theme that connects them all together, that can qualify as a district. In most situations, a district has to be contiguous, has to be one singular shape or boundary. You can't divide it into separate chunks scattered across a broader area. All the resources in a district together must collectively meet at least one of the criteria for listing. So like a downtown business district, for example, all the buildings together could qualify under the history of commerce for funding for driving the area's local economy. Or if we have a residential neighborhood from the late 1800s, it could qualify under architecture for having all the different historic architectural styles together there in one area. And it is important to note that a district can have some non-historic buildings within its boundaries, but even if they are in the boundaries, they aren't considered part of the National Register. The Park Service has these divided into two categories. You have properties that are contributing to a district and properties that are non-contributing. Contributing resources are those that have historic value and they connect to the history of that district. And so contributing resources are on the National Register. And non-contributing properties are those that are too new to be historic or they're too altered to retain their historic integrity. So they're called non-contributing and therefore not on the National Register. So even if you have a property that's within a district, but it's called non-contributing, you would not be eligible to apply for the tax credits or matching grants that contributing properties can qualify for. Next slide, please. So we're going to get into the 4 different criteria for listing a property. The first category is criterion A, which is any property that is the site of a historic event, historic pattern, or historic trend. This is probably one of our broader categories. There's a whole lot of applications you can use for this. Like a historic bank building could qualify under criterion A for being connected to the history of commerce for the local economy. A school building could use criterion A because it's connected to the history of local education. A train station could qualify under criterion A for the history of transportation, and so forth. And the majority of historic districts we have out there use criterion A, typically for the history of commerce or social history, industrial history, politics and government, or community planning and development. Next slide. And then criterion B is a bit more less often used. It's for properties that are connected to a historically important person or people during the productive part of their lives. So primarily their career or what they did for a living. Often we'd use this for houses or workplaces of individuals. It's not too often used for districts. We do have a couple examples in West Virginia, not too many. The site in the picture here is a little district in Lewisburg called the South Church Street Historic District. It's only 3 houses, which there really is no limit. There's no minimum requirement for a district size. As long as you have 2 or more properties and it makes sense, you can make it a district. But this district was listed because each home belongs to an important person in the coal industry or local education. So a pretty rare case of criterion B being used, a bit harder to use for larger districts. Next slide, please. And then criterion C is for properties that are connected to an important historic architectural style, a landscaping design, engineering technique, or a work of art. And this is a pretty broad category too. We use this for lots of properties that have good architectural design or artistic merit to them. And it's been used for homes and buildings, public art like sculptures, murals, and monuments, parks and cemeteries for their landscape designs, and even more mundane resources like bridges, tunnels, and dams have been listed for their connection to engineering history. We do have some historic districts that use criterion C, usually for architecture. That's a pretty easy one. If you have lots of buildings that have well intact building styles, like commercial style, Queen Anne style, Tudor Revival style, it can be listed for that. Next slide, please. And then criterion D is a bit more tricky to define, but the Park Service calls criterion D properties those that have the potential to yield new information on a historical subject. So basically, if you have a property that has, there's something about the property that can provide new information on a topic that needs more research. And that's been interpreted mainly to mean archaeological sites. If you have a place where you can, do a study or a dig there, find artifacts and remnants that can help inform you about the thing it's associated with, that would go under criterion D. And it can be listed whether or not it's been excavated yet. Criterion D properties are normally Native American sites, burial grounds or burial mounds, historic battlefields, the sites of military entrenchments or old colonial era forts, and even some industrial sites too. One good example we have in West Virginia is the Nuttleburg Historic District. It's an abandoned coal mining town where there's not much left except for a handful of buildings, as well as various building foundations, some rusting coal mining equipment, and a couple mine shafts. And by studying that and looking at the industrial archaeology, people are able to learn more about the early industrial history of West Virginia's coal mining communities. Next slide, please. So how do you go about listing a property on the National Register? And we'll study just how you do a district, since that's a bit bigger. And typically how community lists a district is they will hire a historic preservation consultant, such as Courtney Zimmerman, to survey and study the proposed area that you want to put a district in. They'll do research on the area's history, document each individual building and look at its integrity, see if they're historic or not. And they'll produce a report that provides recommendations on the boundaries of the district and what properties inside the district would be contributing and non-contributing. Typically, the consultant provides the results of their reports to our office, the SHPO, and we provide comments and say whether or not we agree with their assessment. And then from there, someone can work on completing the nomination form itself. Sometimes the consultant who prepared the survey can do the nomination. Other times the community might try and do it themselves or hire a different person. It just depends on the different circumstances. Whenever a nomination form is complete, it gets sent to the SHPO, and we review the draft. We issue comments on it. If necessary, we make changes or request that changes be made. And it goes through multiple draft revisions before we approve the final draft. After that, a nomination is sent to the State Review Board for approval. Each state has one. They're typically a nonpartisan board of people who are experts in the historic preservation field. They study the nomination, they ask questions if need be, and they vote whether or not to recommend it for approval. Assuming the board does approve, our office will then forward the nomination to National Park Service for their final review. And they have the choice to either approve it, reject it, or send it back to us for further revisions. If the Park Service does approve the nomination, then it is considered officially put on the National Register. And then our SHPO will notify local officials and property owners, and hopefully everyone lives happily ever after. So I believe it's now Courtney's turn.
Thanks, Cody. It's great to be here. There's some familiar names on the list. Just to refresh everyone's memory, Cody is the National Register and Survey Coordinator for the West Virginia State Historic Preservation Office. I'm a historic preservation consultant. I've been doing consulting for about 14 years. Before that, I worked for the West Virginia Division of Highways. So I've been on multiple sides of the National Register and Survey process. So we're going to start with why should you resurvey an existing historic district and revise a National Register nomination? It's already been done. People have studied it. Why would you go back and revisit it? Well, there have been evolving technical standards for National Register nominations since the program started in the 60s. We're finding out that I think we can't be too hard on our predecessors from the 70s and 80s, because I don't think anyone could have really imagined the legal implications and kind of the sticky situations that we find ourselves in with National Register districts and properties nowadays. Of course, time passes and more things become significant, and so we might need to and we might learn more information about a place or a building. So we want to reevaluate its significance, expand the period of significance, and you might have more properties within your district. Sometimes, you know, they didn't really say for sure whether something was contributing or non-contributing in the language that we use now. So we need to clarify those. And then, of course, if there are any errors or omissions, we want to document that and update that. Next slide, please. So as Cody mentioned, if your property is listed, you could be eligible for grant funding. But if you're not sure, you know, you just need to know, am I contributing or not? For the survey part, we can look at whether it's been altered, what is its current condition, and then we also document what characteristic features of the building need to be preserved. So when you have to work with the SHPO on the updates or some of the work that you need to do, you will know, well, this is a Greek revival, so these are the important features, or this has been already altered, so that's okay, we can change or replace that. That's what a survey, an updated survey, will tell you. Next. Economic benefits. So as Cody mentioned, there are state and federal historic tax credits for rehabilitating historic buildings. With the fine print is that the building must be listed in the National Register individually or as a contributing resource. And you also have to conform to certain historic preservation standards. So we need to clarify that if we're not sure about those things. Next. Environmental review and compliance. So those of you who are working with the EPA on brownfields projects, even if you're not planning on restoring anything, if you have historic properties or a historic district within your project area, you have to, and you're getting a federal grant, you have to go through the Section 106 process. So again, you need to know where these boundaries are, what's included. If you've already had the area surveyed and you know what's there, then you're going to save time in your project. You're not going to have to go back and forth. Is this historic or isn't it? And then you might have, if you need to mitigate, you could have some stuff ready to go. So you'll have some documentation already. A survey and a nomination could give you some great content for interpretive signs. A survey could give you ideas for things that could be nominated that aren't, and so forth for mitigation. Next. Again, for local design review and planning. So Again, if you're a local historic district and you have an ordinance, you want to, and you're using the National Register as you're kind of mirroring that evaluation, you want to know, is this subject to review? And what are, when someone comes to us and wants to make a change, how do we know what's okay or what's not okay? So a survey can give you kind of a baseline for what's important about each building. And then, of course, you can encourage your property owners. Hey, you're listed in the National Register. You could get tax credits. You could get a grant for this. And then, of course, historic districts people love going to these places when they're fixed up. I mean, they give your town a real sense of identity. So it's smart economically to invest in your historic buildings. Next. So I just want to just call your attention really quickly to historic preservation funding, which provides the Historic Preservation Fund is the national fund the federal fund that is shared among all the state SHPOs as well as tribal historic preservation offices. This funding subsidizes Section 106 project reviews, staffing at state SHPOs, helps provide the grants that people get. It's not funded by taxes. The funding comes from offshore oil and gas leases. So when a big oil company drills in the Gulf and they have to pay a fee for that, that goes right into historic preservation funding. So this funding is at risk right now. Not Congress, I think it's the Department of the Interior hasn't released these funds to the states, even though they've been appropriated. And in 2026, there are some budgets that eliminate all HPF funding. So I just want to say, be aware of this. You can look into it more. And if you feel that historic preservation funding is important, I would encourage you to reach out to your elected officials and let them know that. Next. So this is an example of of the evolution of what the West Virginia historic property inventory form. So you can see they're the one on the right is like one of the earliest ones, and they've changed. And some of these forms really don't have very much information on them at all. So when we go look at these, they're not that helpful. So we need to update a lot of these forms that are older. Next. Here are some great, just wonderful tidbits from surveys of the past. So this description of this building says, a hideous box stands immediately to the east, designed in a bastard swimming pool style. I love this. But this is not really, a common architectural style term that we use. It was kind of a one-off. So even though this delights us, we probably need to update this kind of thing. And then on the right here, so I want you to just imagine in your mind what this building could look like. No attempt to landscape, no shrubbery. Occupants appear to take no interest in maintaining the imposing old house. So a lot of judgment, a lot of personal feelings in this survey. And then it says, the one attractive feature of the entire clumsy building is this window. Okay, so just try to imagine what this might look like. Okay, next, the big reveal is this is the one attractive feature is that window of this building. So, we might have a different opinion of this now. So these are the kind of things you find in some of the older historic resource surveys. Next. Again, so in nominations, some of the early nominations, they may or may not have a clear period of significance. A lot of them use these categories like pivotal buildings, and then they'll say contributing or neutral buildings, and then they have intrusions. So those are not the terms we use today. It's contributing or it's not contributing. And then So a lot of them again have a lot of like kind of personal information and opinions in them, and we really try to make it very as fact-based as we possibly can and follow the criteria and the guidance by the National Park Service in our evaluations. Next. Again, with mapping, so you can see here, the red line is the boundary and it's right up against the backs of these buildings. So the map that's in the nomination is the legal official map. So in this case, you know, it doesn't include the rest of the lot. It's just very, it causes problems when you don't have a clear boundary or the boundary doesn't make sense for our purposes today. Next. Boundary issues. Now, not the kind that you have to go to the therapist for. I mean, maybe, I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I need to when I'm dealing with these maps, but this is a project we're working on in Lewisburg. So the red line were the UTM points, the coordinates that were listed in the nomination. The green line is the tracing of the sketch map in that same nomination, and they're not the same. Even the same nomination had two different boundaries, and this boundary cut through people's parcels. It went through the middle of buildings, and you know, I'm not trying to beat up on the people that prepared this because they didn't have GIS. They didn't have, you know, the tools that we have now. And they didn't probably imagine that the Lewisburg Historic Landmarks Commission would have property owners coming up and saying, well, I don't qualify because, you know, this only goes through part of my parcel. So we have worked with them to resurvey this whole area and draw the boundary with trying to understand the intent. We're not expanding the boundary. We're just trying to clarify it based on the original nomination. Next. Here's another example of, this is a National Historic Landmark, and when they listed it, they just said the boundary followed the right of way, 60 feet from the center line on either side, 120-foot wide corridor. And the right-of-way map or the parcel map in this area, it's not 120 feet, but that's the nomination boundary. So now when the DOT wanted to just kind of install a pull-off on this road that's below the trestle, and it was a National Historic Landmark and kicked in a whole big review process for just really wasn't going to affect the integrity of this property, but it was in the boundary, so it was a whole big thing. Next. So some of the challenges we've faced is incorrect coordinates. So you might have a point on a map and it's not where the building is. So you have to go figure out if it's already been surveyed before. You have to go figure out what building they were talking about. In West Virginia, a lot of address numbers for homes have been changed and renumbered to make it easier for 911 and emergency responders, which is great. But so we have a point that's not in the right place, and we have an address that's not the same anymore. So we have to go try to look at the old picture, and thank God for Google Street View, and trying to match up the previous HPI to the current property. A lot of things have been demolished, so you have to kind of figure that out. And then again, mapping. You just really have to make sure that you've accounted for everything, whether it's old or not. You want to have a complete picture of everything in the survey area or the boundary. Next. So what we do, if we're resurveying and there's already been an extensive survey, even if there hasn't been a survey, we start with a database, and you can use different software for this, but we take every existing HPI, we put it in the database, and then we will start correcting the coordinates if we need to, updating the address, making sure we know where they are, making sure every existing survey number is matched up on the map to the right building. And then we go through and everything that's not been surveyed, we add those to the database. And we might do some tax parcel research to get like dates of construction, which are not always correct, but it's somewhere to start. The function, the name, just preliminary kind of basic information in the office. And then we have a field survey checklist from our database of everything we need to record. So we want to make sure we check everything off. And when you're in the field, you always find more. So be open to that possibility as well. Next. So here's an example, where is this building? The old address was 521 to 523. Okay, those are different. The point is between these two. Is it 1702 or 1722? Well, it's neither. It's 1726. So it's it's just a matter of looking at aerials and just going back and forth till you figure out where the point should be. Next. So we conduct our field surveys with a National Register nomination in our minds. We record everything. You take a picture of everything, even if it's like a brand new, McDonald's or something. You just have a picture so so if anyone asks, that's what this is. Always be safe. Wear safety gear. Like I said, you document every single building, no matter what it is. Take at least 2 views of every property and lots of streetscapes and wider views. So you can show people what the setting is, but also so you can remember in the field, where was this? And keep a photo log. And then, maybe as historians, we just like to stay on the sidewalk and take pictures and scurry away and try to avoid people if you're an introvert, but, talk with them. If someone's out in their yard, you just go say, I'm a historian. That kind of breaks the ice. Don't say I'm with the DOT or the EPA, even if you are. You lead with you're a historian, because then it's a little more of interest to people, and less like, what are they doing? And you can find out a lot of great information just from chatting with whoever's out and about. Next. So again, current architectural survey standards, you don't need to make it up or guess, because every state SHPO has a National Register and survey manual. So it's online, it's usually online on their website, or you contact them and it's a PDF and you can see exactly what they want. It tells you everything you need to know. Here are the materials you can choose from. So there's you have to use the guidance, or you're not going to give them what they want and you'll have to do it again. And here's some of our favorite resources that we use when we're completing these forms, filling out all the information about each building. Next. This is the current West Virginia Historic Property Inventory form, and you'll see there's a box for anything you would want to know. Exterior siding, roofing material, foundation, 2 different, well, this one only has 1, but you can put multiple photos, the map of where it is, narrative description, and you can add sheets if you need to for additional information. Next. You can gather data in various ways. We use a program called FileMaker, which is like a database, mobile survey database, but you can also use GIS. Esri Survey 123 is one that a lot of people use, or you can use paper forms and photo logs and do it the old-fashioned way. So there are various options for that. Next. Some of the research resources that we really like that are online include Sanborn fire insurance maps, which are just so amazing. And so many of them are now digitized on the Library of Congress, these will tell you what the building was made of, color coded. It'll have a lot of times a label of what was in there, a harness shop or a livery stable, blacksmith, a dwelling, store. And they did them every few years, so you can trace the evolution of your building. You can see what the porches were, number of stories, so much information in these Sanborn maps. TopoView USGS allows you to look at geo-referenced topographic maps from the 1800s all the way up till now. They're not as detailed on the building level, but as far as like development of a place or community, you can see that. In West Virginia, we use West Virginia History on View, which is just tons and like, I don't know, tens of thousands of historic photos. Historicaerials.com is what, or there are other, other places you can find old aerial imagery, but this is one that we use a lot. And then census data. So, sometimes it's hard to figure out where exactly these people lived, but you can at least get an idea of what their jobs were and, what the family makeup was and demographics from the census. Next. Then after you've done your survey and you have done your survey report and you kind of know everything's approved by the SHPO for the survey report, you got to decide how you're going to update your National Register document if there's one existing. So for the really old ones, we just usually end up doing a totally new form, the whole registration form 10900. We do a totally new historic context, which is just the general history of the area. We'll change the period of significance. So we just, if it's really old or a lot needs change, you might as well just do a new one. If there's not much, maybe you just needed to add a few buildings to it, or sometimes when properties are moved, they'll do a modified continuation sheet, which is a lot more of a brief document. And you have to have that complete inventory of contributing and non-contributing. Even if it was built in 2024, it's got to be in that list. Next. And so we have people from various states. So we have worked in several states. So it's kind of the same. Next slide. They all have the same, basic criteria from the National Park Service, but each state has their own different way of approaching it and managing surveys and nominations. So in Pennsylvania, they have an online GIS system called PA Share. So you can go on there and you can look up information. When you're doing a survey in Pennsylvania, you use the Survey 123 app. They have set this up, and that's the way that you provide information to them, not on paper forms or PDFs. You might, depending on the size of your project or what exactly you're doing, you may have to pay for a subscription, but there is a free option just to go look. As with most, every state has two survey levels. There's a basic sort of reconnaissance level where you're just looking around to see what's there and documenting it. And then the next step would be evaluating it for eligibility. And then again, you're going to want to connect with the SHPO staff if you're trying to do a project like as early as you can, and just talk with them about the scope and what the requirements are, and so you can be sure that you're going about it the right way for your goals. Next. Maryland, the Maryland SHPO is called the Maryland Historical Trust. And again, they also have an online survey manual. They also have an online GIS system called Medusa. You don't turn to stone if you look at it, don't worry. They have their inventory forms, the MIHP forms, are almost the same as a National Register nomination form. It's like a mirror to it. So it's very extensive. So in Maryland, you're going to do more of a reconnaissance ID level survey, and then talk with your clients or the Maryland Historical Trust staff on which properties would warrant this very intensive form. You couldn't do like, 50 MIHP forms because they're so detailed. So we've done projects in Maryland where we just provided them with a spreadsheet with the thumbnail images and some basic information. They're also like determination of eligibility forms. So they have different, I'm just going to keep saying, if first thing you want to do is reach out to the staff about your project or your goals and work with them on what you need to do in that state. Next. And then again, Virginia also has an online survey manual. They have a again, these levels of survey. Windshield is just, you're kind of just getting the lay of the land and seeing if there's anything worth looking into further. Reconnaissance and intensive. They have an online GIS and cultural resources information system called the they may call it the VCRIS, I don't know, VCRIS. So you enter, it's not a mobile app. You would gather your data in whatever way that you prefer when you're doing a field survey, but then you would enter it into the web, via the web into their system. And again, it may require a paid subscription to do this depending on the scope of your project. Next. Okay, so yeah, that was my brief overview of survey updates and National Register updates. I'm going to turn it back over to Cody for a real brief case study, and then we'll be done.
And hello again. I'll keep this brief since we do want to have time for questions at the end, but our case study here is the Wheeling Historic District. It's an industrial city up in the northern panhandle of West Virginia. But it was listed back in 1979, and it had, at the time, there were 204 resources that were contributing and 53 non-contributing. And most properties that were built prior to 1939 were considered contributing. And it was a fairly decent nomination at the time, but after more than 40 years of more time passing, the nomination became outdated because dozens of historic buildings were demolished in the district over the years due to neglect and inadequate preservation regulations. And there were also a lot of buildings that at the time of the listing in 79 were too young to be historic, but after 40 years, they had become historic in their own right. Next slide, please. Just looking at the map here, this is the boundaries of the Wheeling district. All the gray dots you see in the borders are properties that have been demolished. So there was a whole lot of loss of historic fabric in the Wheeling district. So the nomination needed to be updated to reflect those changes and to make an argument that it still had enough integrity and significance to stay on the National Register. Next slide. So we had a consultant come in and write an amendment to the original nomination in 2023, which got approved and updated the whole district. And it really showcased how much loss occurred in the district over the past 40 years. Under this amended nomination, there are 112 contributing resources. So almost 100 properties, or pretty much half of all the properties in the district, were lost over the course of 40 years. And then the number of non-contributing resources remained fairly stable. But we extended the period of significance from 1939 up to 1977. So any properties built prior to 1977 that weren't historic in the previous nomination could be reclassified as historic under this new documentation. So the new nomination reflects changes that have occurred in the district over time, provides more useful information for grants and tax credits and planning purposes today, and it helped keep the district on the National Register. Next slide. And that's just a comparison of the inventory lists from the old and the new nomination. We don't have to go through that. So next slide. Here's some of the maps. The map on the right is for the new documentation. It has a nice color-coded depiction of what buildings are historic, which ones aren't, and which ones are empty lots now. Next slide. And then an interesting case was this building in the district called the Kaufman's Department Store. And it really shows the potential to acknowledge the historic importance of alterations in a district. So this was a store building constructed in the early or the late 1800s. You can see the brick on the rear of the building. In the 1950s, the owners at the time constructed this big metal facade to completely cover the front of the building in an attempt to make their business look more modern and keep attracting customers that they were losing to shopping malls and stuff. So this change was only about 25 years old when the district was listed in 1979. So this was considered too detrimental a change to the building. So it was designated as non-historic in 1979. When the nomination was updated in 2023, this metal facade on the building had been in place since the 1950s, so almost 70 years. And it had been there for so long that it became historic in its own right. So this building was redesignated as a historic property or a contributing resource to the district because of the historic change that occurred in the 1950s. And you can do that with some properties. It's a good idea if you have buildings that have been changed over time. And if the changes are historic, you can still gain access to those financial incentives and preservation incentives to protect your property. So I believe that's it. We got about 7 minutes left. If you have any questions for me or Courtney, we're happy to try and answer them.
Everyone completely knows what to do now. Total understanding.
Mind
You've given
blown.
us something to think about.
Good.
Thank you so much. I personally found this really interesting. Love the sense of humor throughout it too. Thank you all for this. We just want to let you know about some upcoming events. You can check this out later, but we have a webinar coming up through the Mid-Atlantic Planning Collaboration that has to do with climate and their environmental impacts on housing. So that'll be a good webinar. We also have the National Brownfields Conference. That's going to be in August in Chicago, and then also the West Virginia Brownfields and Main Street Conference in September, and that's going to be located in Morgantown. We certainly encourage you to take a look at that and learn more. Next slide, please. This is just a reminder of how TAD can help. So if you have any questions, if you're not quite sure, if that would be a fit, please reach out to us. Our contact information is in the white box there. No question is ever silly, so please send it our way, and we would be happy to answer any questions. And then on the following slide, you'll find the contact information for Cody and Courtney.